Hi, and welcome to Relationships and Astrology's special edition on the Aries New Moon, March 26th. I'm Armand Diaz in New York.
And I'm Margaret Gray in Dublin.
So I always think about the Aries New Moon as being the real start of the astrological year. We always say the Aries ingress, when the sun goes into Aries, is the start of the astrological year. But for me, if the lunar cycle is winding down as it's been for the past week, you sort of have this contrast of like the sun kind of in the northern hemisphere growing and above the horizon more, but you also have the lunar cycle winding down. And at the Aries new moon, they sort of sync up, and they're both beginnings. And so I think every new moon is a time of beginnings, but I think the Aries new moon is really the beginning, and it sort of resonates with every area of life.
I think it's true. And this one is, there's so many planets in Aries at the moment. So I think this Aries energy of starting new things, of kind of, for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, spring is coming. So that concept of spring cleaning, starting again, clearing out the old. I mean, we've got the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Uranus all in Aries. So it's a really dynamic energy, maybe a little impatient at times. And it's certainly a very me-centered energy, which we talked about in the transits of the week as well. I think one of the things with Aries, which is really relevant, particularly, and also even in relationships, is really to have a goal. Aries loves a goal. So I think with this new moon, it's an ideal time to really look at relationships, whether they're love relationships, romantic relationships, or family or friends, and really think, okay, what are our goals together? Why are we together? What are we doing together? And it doesn't have to be long-term goals, but even the goals for the next 6 months or something to consider, what would we like to do? And particularly fun activities. Often we do these goals around finances or practical things, but we kind of forget the fun area. And I think a new moon in Aries really loves to focus on fun.
Exactly. And doing things. Aries is a very active sign. It's not just about thinking. And even at the new moon, so you're setting your intentions, you're thinking about looking forward to the future and all of that. But do something. Aries is active. Aries energy responds to activity, I think.
Yes, and also Aries is about learning courage. People assume that the Aries energy already knows courage, but actually it's about a lifelong process of learning courage and taking risks. And sometimes Aries can get a little lost in the kind of Libra indecision or wanting to please or whatever, and he needs to pull right back and say, what do I want? And, even if it means jumping over hurdles or obstacles, in some ways with Aries, the more the better. So take a leap of faith. This is a great time. So in a relationship, maybe if somebody's been thinking of asking somebody out or doing something different, go for it. This is a perfect time to do it, even though we know Venus is retrograde, so we're not ignoring that, of course.
And Venus has actually provided a little bit of contrast, because just the day before the new moon, she's retrograded back into Pisces to sort of collect a little bit more of that Piscean energy that we've had really since the beginning of the year, and kind of pull it forward, I guess, into Aries when she goes direct in April. So I think that, there is a little bit of that kind of caution, a little bit of that, a little difficulty getting traction that can come from Venus being in Pisces and retrograde. Also, too, I mean, it is, right at the very, very new moon on Monday, it's an active time, and it's great to take a little bit of action, but it's also, it's just the beginning of the cycle. We're not deep into it such that, actions are really fostered. The moon is still very, very quiet and very, 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 very inward.
Yes, and also not forgetting that the ruler of this moon is Mars in Taurus. So in a way that can really ground it. It might slow it down a tiny bit. And of course, Taurus, the focus is more on security rather than adventure. So there's a bit of a kind of contradiction there between the two of them. But it can really contain it and give it roots. And also it's a very sensual Mars. So it's something that, the combination of the Aries moon and the Mars in Taurus can be quite a a sensual combination in terms of relationships.
And more than that, Mars is on the very day of the new moon in an easy sextile relationship to Neptune in Pisces. So you talk about fantasy, you talk about sensuality, and that's really that's a pretty nice aspect. And actually, if it happened on a full moon, I would be thinking all kinds of things. But on a new moon, it sets the potential up maybe for a long. It may not manifest right immediately, but it sets the potential up for some pretty nice stuff in the future.
Well, it certainly potentially grounds dreams, doesn't it? So it kind of feels like, okay, we can have these fantasies and dreams, but actually maybe now we can actually bring them to earth, ground them, and then maybe take some action, as you say, at some point now or in the future. So also, of course, we've got Jupiter squaring Pluto. We've had this, for a little while, but now it's pretty exact. What do you make of this aspect, Armand?
Well, this is an aspect that has its greatest manifestation, I think, at the collective level. I think it is an aspect that has a lot to do. In this case, Jupiter in Libra is the diplomat, and Pluto in Capricorn is not. And there is a question of, can we solve things by diplomacy, or is it going to be a straight out power struggle? There is a lot of association with the Jupiter-Pluto cycle in the hard aspects with some pretty scary stuff in terms of terrorism and things like that. Not that actually we've already seen enough of that. I think that's sort of an ongoing problem. But it may not be anything new that comes up, but the concerns with it are liable to be very strong. And I think that, we need to, we look at the Aries new moon, and as you said, it's a very independent, a very me-oriented new moon. This is kind of, this Jupiter-Pluto aspect is saying, well, it's not all about you. It's not all about your personal stuff. And I think that it's going to help or is going to force us to sort of look at our personal stuff in context. And, we often, like, it seems like, a lot of stuff that goes on in the world is happening out there. And then I've got my life in here. But the truth of the matter is what goes on out there and what happens in here, these are just different sides of the same coin. And, you're living in that environment, it's your fishbowl.
Yes, and it all impacts on relationships. It really can put, because if both individuals or individuals in a family are kind of concerned or worried or whatever, then of course it adds an additional stress factor. It brings the external into that private domain of intimacy, of relationship, and it really affects the dynamics. And sometimes some of it can be unconscious, that people don't even know why they're feeling a little out of sorts or whatever, but it could be that, there's so much going on, and anybody who's sensitive will certainly pick it up.
Yeah.
Just to also mention that, of course, Venus in Aries is quincunx the North Node in Virgo. So again, still that concept of being of service. So how to harness that Aries energy into being of service. So whether we're doing it individually or in relationships, I think that's very important. Also, kind of interesting thing that, as I was saying to you earlier, that I just stumbled upon when I was doing some research on the internet, that on September 29th or 30th, 2012, the full moon was actually at the exact same degree of Aries, at 7° Aries. So there may be some resonance. It might be worth just thinking back to that date and seeing what was going on for you. And is there some resonance with this new moon?
It's really hard to remember stuff, but some people will have had some, important thing happen around that time. And I think that it's always interesting, when something really did click in around that time, to look back and see, what the resonance is with that, because it will be there. It will be there. We're constant flood of experiences coming past us, so it's a little hard to sort of hold on to stuff and take notes. But on the other hand, you do notice these resonances.
And also to say that if anybody has planets at 19 degrees Cancer, that's quite an important spot at the moment, because it's going to be the empty leg of a T-square with Pluto, Jupiter, and Uranus. So it effectively forms a grand cross. So, just to notice that, you may feel under a little bit more pressure, or if your loved one has, anything at 19 Cancer, just to kind of be aware that the pressure is on a little bit right now.
Well, very good point. Very good point, Margaret.
And also, I love looking at the Sabian symbols, of course, and which Linda Hill does so wonderfully. And this one is a large woman's hat with streamers blown by an east wind. And I just thought it was interesting that, of course, the sun rises in the east. And, it's interesting, the east wind doesn't have a great reputation. It's not very permanent. So, kind of a mixed symbol in that sense, that there's something that maybe is rising that's coming, but we don't know, is it going to come to fruition or not?
Wow, that's a very good reading of that symbol.
So anybody who's got planets in Aries, of course, or at Libra around the 6, 7, 8 degree mark, or Capricorn, of course, or Cancer at those degrees, this is going to really affect your chart more than other people, because it's a new moon, it's not an eclipse, so it's not as big an effect on everyone. But just keep an eye on it if you've got planets around those degrees.
And we will be back with the weekly forecasts, and we'll be back with the full moon in 2 weeks.
Great. See you soon, Armand. Bye-bye.
Bye.